Hello everybody, my name's Novi and welcome back to the channel. Over the course of wrestling history, there's been countless great wrestlers. All unique, all special, and all will be forever celebrated. However, even the best of the best can distinguish themselves in certain ways. And one of the most coveted ways to do so in this sport is by being deemed the ace of a given promotion. Hiroshi Tanahashi is the most well-known and rightly appreciated aces of all time. Not just because he's a fantastic wrestler who's had some of the best matches of all time, but also for how he pulled New Japan out of the dark ages and into what many people consider to be their golden era, which is exactly the kind of feat that only an ace of a given promotion can pull off. Nowadays, there's so many great wrestlers around the world, and so many of them are having some of the best matches of all time even. And because of those reasons, I feel like it's really hard to distinguish who is truly the ace of any given promotion. So today, I want to take a look at a couple of those promotions from AEW to Stardom and truly define who is the ace of each one. Before we get into it though, make sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for match reviews, live streams, and new videos just like these where we're always talking graps. Let's start by looking at the promotion I talk about most on the channel, AEW. In the land of the elite, there's a lot of possible contenders for that ace role these days. You could easily say Will Ospreay, a guy who adds so much life to every single show that he's on. Whether it's those shockingly fiery promos that I think nobody expected him to be good at cutting on US TV, that also really show just how British he is, or his very expected fantastic matches that get AEW crowds rocking and rolling like it's 2021 all over again, or you could say just his entrance alone, which is always that bolt of energy whenever the weekly TV really needs it. No matter what aspect of his game you want to focus on, I think that I can say overall, he's injected so much life into the promotion as a whole. And while I do think it's a bit too early to say that he's the ace of AEW, it's clear that he's well on his way to becoming that. And I don't doubt that he'll achieve that status sooner rather than later. We can also consider someone who has already achieved that status in the past, Jon Moxley, as a possible contender. But he is the former ace of AEW, so I think you guys can kind of guess where I'm going to go with this. His big issue that led him to lose that title is that he stopped caring about weekly wrestling TV. He's felt so tuned out of that aspect of the game for so long, and I think it's really shown in a lot of his work in AEW specifically. But what I will say though is that this new character that he's been throwing himself into lately has clearly injected some of that love for the game that he used to have back into his veins. He's a guy that's truly at his best when he has a story to really dive into, and the fact that he has that now, and the fact that the story is actually good, at least so far, gives me high hopes for what end of 2024 Jon Moxley might end up looking like. He may not be the ace anymore, but that doesn't mean that he can't will himself back into that role soon enough, especially when he's this version of himself, that locked in Jon Moxley that I think everybody loves best. But you can probably ignore this if he goes back to doing some jiu-jitsu. But there is a guy though who has become the best version of himself this year, and especially when you consider that he's probably the top heel in AEW right now, deserves to be in this conversation. The man I'm talking about is the very angry cowboy these days, Hangman Adam Page. I'm sure that many of you who have watched this channel for some time know how I feel about Hangman Adam Page. If you looked at any of my recent videos, you definitely know. And I was close to giving him the ace title in this video, not because I'm a huge fan, but for a lot of different reasons. Top of that list though is a characteristic that he's always had in AEW. Hangman Adam Page is the heart of this company. No matter what he's doing or who he's feuding with, he's so good that he ends up becoming the centerpiece of the shows. We saw it happen when he came back in the Owen Hart Cup tournament earlier this year. Quickly, a lot of the conversations surrounding AEW, specifically surrounding the world title, were about Hangman and what he had going on and if he'd get to that point. That is the kind of presence that aces have. And he's followed that up with some really great performances in the ring as he's grown into this new heel role. The problem with Hangman's year though isn't that he hasn't been good or that there's some big misstep, but that his year is defined in tandem with another guy who's in contention for the ace title when it comes to AEW. And when you compare both of those guys' years, one stands out significantly more than the others, which is in part due to the booking, I'll make that caveat, but even still, it's the truth, and it's why I'm going with Swerve Strickland as my ace of AEW. I could point to the world title run as a reason. I could point to his matches as a reason. I could even point to the feud with Hangman alone as a reason. And I genuinely think that all of those contribute and are extremely valuable to this argument. But what I'm going with is something that a lot of people might not have noticed, but it's something that I've really picked up on since he left after All Out to take a little bit of a break. It's how the shows have felt without him. There is a certain energy gone, a certain feel that I can't help but miss. He made everything he did on the show feel important. He made the world title feel like the centerpiece of AEW in a way that not many others have. And he takes advantage of every single opportunity that he's given. He makes the most of every single one. There's so much that can be said about Swerve and how he transforms the weekly TV just by being there. And while I think there's plenty of other names, some that I've listed, that have a case to be the ace of AEW, I think there's no one in the entire promotion that stack up to his resume when you include everything. He's made himself an absolute star of AEW through sheer work and grind alone. In a company so full of talent, so full of people that could be world champions, Swerve Strickland just feels different. And it's why I think he's the ace of AEW. Now let's head over to the other major US promotion where things are a lot more clear. I could sit here and go over all kinds of different names like Cody, Roman, Drew, and more so than all of them, Io Sky, but I think we all know that a title like ace could go to nobody else in the WWE but Gunther. Gunther is in a super unique situation where he goes against everything that WWE is right now and sticks to the style that he knows best and does better than almost anyone. Having great matches feels more like a guarantee with him nowadays, whether it's during his record-setting Intercontinental title reign or his current world title reign. Plus, the builds to those matches are always so great because they stick to pro wrestling. Somehow, some way, he operates outside of a system that's designed for wrestlers to work inside of it. He's real in a way I think no other WWE character or wrestler is, and it's why he transcends the usual tribalism that we see in the IWC. Everybody seems to love Gunther, and I think it's for very good reason. For all of that, I don't think there's anybody more fitting of the ace title in WWE than him. Although, like I mentioned at the top of this, Io is a very real contender and deserves a little bit of love here at the end because she is incredible and in a lot of ways does a lot of the same things Gunther does for their TV. Next, we should catch a flight over to Japan and talk about the ace of Stardom. This is another one that is very much a given. The ace of Stardom is 100% Mayu Iwatani. Being around since the start of the promotion, having your history and the brand's history be one and the same, taking it to new heights as the top star, these are the things that Mayu Iwatani and Stardom have done together. And it's not just that either. We're not just doing all, kayfabe stuff. She's also pretty widely regarded as at least in contention for the greatest women's wrestler of all time. And if someone were to put her at that top spot, I wouldn't have a word to say about it. She's shown time and time again why she's held in such a high regard and truly is deserving of the vast amounts of praise that she receives for her work. Mayu is tremendous, and Stardom, especially with higher competition these days, now more so than ever, is very lucky to have her as their ace. That doesn't mean that it'll last forever though, because Mayu and former Stardom promoter Rasi Ogawa are real close. And it seems like almost a given that when her contract runs out, she'll jump over to his new promotion, Marigold. But until that does or doesn't happen, Marigold has an ace, and she's the best women's wrestler, if not the best wrestler overall, in the world in my book, and in yours, if you know ball. It's Sareee. Now, I will preface this by saying that she's not signed to Marigold in any official capacity, which maybe discredits her from this conversation, but since she's their champion and for all the things she's done for them, I'm gonna overlook it and just talk about how great she is, because I'll never pass up an opportunity to talk about how good Sareee is. Since her departure from WWE and NXT, she has been on an otherworldly run of consistency. Not that cage match is the end-all be-all indicator, but I mean, come on. These scores are kind of fucking nuts. It seems like no matter who she's working or where she's working or what, doesn't even matter. She's gonna have a great match. And that's something that Marigold has heavily relied on, especially in their first ever Dreamstar GP, where the consensus seems to be that Sareee is the one putting on the best matches. It's early days into Marigold, but Sareee has been able to create buzz for them like no other, simply because she's that good. Sareee is my pick for the ace of Marigold right now. However, there is one other name I want to point to before we move forward, Utami Hayashishita. She's someone who's had some really great moments and some really great matches so far, that's for sure. But I just think that the consistency hasn't all been there. So while I do think that she will be their ace in due time, I can't give her the mantle in good faith when her main challenger is Sareee. It's just too tough of a bar to clear for right now. Eventually, I think she'll keep finding her own, keep finding her way in this new promotion, and again, she'll be there. Speaking of Sareee though, we might as well move over to where she used to work, NXT, which isn't necessarily the show to always have an ace given its developmental, but when I look at their roster and I ask myself if anyone over there is an ace, I immediately think of the current NXT Women's Champion, Roxanne Perez, who is probably the most exciting women's prospect in the United States for me right now. 22 years old, and with only 6 years experience under her belt, she works like a wrestler who has double that. Her in-ring is snappy, it's smooth, and she leads matches with younger NXT talents, again, like she's been in the game for much longer than 6 years. Her heel turn was also something that many had their doubts with, given her size and how she's always been known for being a babyface. It felt like a pretty big risk to be taking on such a young talent, but she's made the most of it, and I'd say is probably much better now than she was before. I wouldn't say that her promos or anything like that stand out too much. That's an aspect of her game that I think she can still improve on, but her work in the ring as a heel is well beyond her years, which is again something I just can't help but mention over and over again. She's only 22 years old. Her future just seems so bright, and I have no doubt that in that future, she'll be someone that many people consider to be among the best women's wrestlers in the entire world. Roxanne Perez is the ace of NXT. Finally, the last promotion we'll go to is New Japan Pro Wrestling, where there used to be a ton of options for that ace title. And hell, even still, the most prominent ace in the history of pro wrestling, Hiroshi Tanahashi, is still on the roster. However, he lacks knees, so that's not the route I'm gonna go with. I think there's really two names that you could pick out for this, and we'll start with one Shingo Takagi, who despite being overlooked a lot of the time for the top spot in the company, puts in some of the best performances consistently, year in and year out. And while I would love to pick him for that reason, and because I enjoy his work, I think the other of the two does that, but at a much higher level, and is a lot more fitting nowadays. It's Zack Sabre Jr. If you want to talk consistency in wrestling, you have to talk Zack Sabre Jr., who I'm convinced can have a great match with anyone. And on top of that, has high-end stuff better than anyone else on the New Japan roster as of late. Plus, he does wear New Japan on his sleeve. And while it's not something that I'm always taking into account when picking the ace of any promotion, it definitely doesn't hurt his case, because that commitment to New Japan is something that they've leaned on a ton, considering that a lot of their top stars left this year, and considering that their stars of tomorrow aren't necessarily at that main event level just yet. He's been the rock that New Japan has needed in this trying time, and I think that makes for a perfect ace. And also, one last thing, since we're already talking about ZSJ, he should absolutely win that IWGP title later this year. But aside from that, aside from my takes on who should be the champ over there, which I hope you all agree with, Zack Sabre Jr. is the ace of New Japan. Now, just to recap, the aces for each of the promotions that I talked about in this video are as follows. AEW, Swerve Strickland; WWE, Gunther; Stardom, Mayu Iwatani; Marigold, Sareee; NXT, Roxanne Perez; and New Japan Pro Wrestling, Zack Sabre Jr. And with that, that's going to do it for the video, everybody. I hope you all have enjoyed. If you did, leave a like on this video. Make sure to comment your aces for each of the promotions that I talked about in this video, and maybe the other ones I didn't. And also subscribe to the channel, where we're always talking grabs. Thank you all so much for watching. It's been Novi. Much love to each and every one of you. Peace.